Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this new series. It's another section of our spiritual warfare. So, very warm welcome tonight. Here I am. And we're going to be looking at the Prince. What is, I see, good. I'm just checking the sound is there. We're going to look at this title, The Prince. And it will take us a little while to pick it up. So we'll just kind of put it together, and it will make more sense when we've done all three. But it goes like this. The spiritual powers that oppose us are as well organized as the spiritual powers that support us. Defeated? Yes, we know that. Let's put that to one side. They are very powerfully organized. And while we're going to be looking at the prince over Ghana, to begin with, the principles apply to all nations. So I hope we can kind of manage with that. There are teaching notes available, and if you can't find them, I suggest you WhatsApp David Fari, and he will put you onto them. So everything I'm saying tonight is available to you in written form. So with those provisos and understanding that getting started is just a little a struggle, let's begin here. This is the foundation principle. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And this scripture from Ephesians is really the biblical undergirding of what I've been saying already, that we are facing a very well-organized enemy. He has methodia, is the Greek word. He has method. And if we take his attack lightly, we will be in desperate trouble. And so what we're going to do is look at one of his principalities, the one I think is very strong in Ghana. And once we've done that, we're going to look at the character of this principality, and that is universal. So there we are. So we're just trying to pick this up. This is the key piece of theology, that we are up against the dark powers of this world and the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. We are up against these things. So that really is where we're beginning, where we left off previously when we were doing spiritual warfare. Let me explain how I came across the prince. I was praying very much, trying to seek the Lord for Ghana, which is sinking into very low spiritual state. The prince is certainly aggressive, and he wants to sit on the throne of Ghana. This is what I saw. I saw a figure of in the spirit, I saw a figure of a very old man. He has been around for a very long time. His very presence was depressive, and his every action brought more and more depression. Gloom and despair hung like a mist around him. His name was the Ancient One. His purpose was, and still is, to bring Ghana down. Now that's how I got into this situation. That's how I got into understanding the prince. When I saw him, this prince was called the Ancient One. And look at him. He has been around for a very long time. That's so important. The enemy plans his strategy for centuries, not days or hours. He's been planning his strategies ever since Calvary when he lost. He's been planning a strategy to try and get back. And so he has a long, long history. His very presence was depressive, and his every action brought more and more depression. I would say that is a key element of the dark powers in the spiritual world. Fear, bondage, and depression. That's their hallmark. And when I felt that in my spirit, I felt this was very much a reality. His name was the Ancient One. It's not always the case, but it's very useful to know the names because that gives us authority. Jesus, what is your name? I bet Legion didn't want to say it, but he said it. And the Ancient One, this is the name of this particular prince, his purpose was and still is to bring Ghana down and other nations down. Now there's a real key principle here, I think, that we have to grasp, that we are more lazy than the enemy. We are more. Sorry, I was just attacking a fly there. We are more lazy than the enemy. He has been planning for years, centuries, for his strategy, and his strategy is clear. And this is it: bring Ghana down. Right, that's the first thing. Bring Ghana down. Secondly, get on the throne of Ghana and rule Ghana. This will mean that he can say to the Lord, you no longer rule this nation, so you can't claim to be king of all the earth. I rule this nation. And then he'll move to other princes and other powers to take over other nations. That is his strategy. And in that strategy, the UK is caught, because once he moves out from Ghana, he'll move out onto all other nations, including the UK. So that's how it is. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat all that because I've been living with it for a long time, but perhaps it comes as a bit of a shock. Let's just recap, because we have got 3 weeks to do this, and you can read the notes afterwards. The dark powers are opposing us. Our struggle is against the dark powers. We've been doing this spiritual warfare teaching for quite a long time now, haven't we? So those of you that have followed it through, you know that already. We are facing an organized enemy, the dark powers, in the heavenly places. I hear this in Ghana. The cross has done it all. That's just an excuse for laziness. The cross has done it all, and Satan is defeated, but that all will not be established until the Lord returns. In the meantime, we're living in the gap between his victory and his coming to establish it. In that gap, the enemy has room to maneuver. And although he's lost, he hasn't given up. And he wants to rule, and he'll keep trying to do that. That's what we're facing. We will be looking at the character of the enemy, but we're just beginning. He's a prince in the heavenly places, this one we're facing. And this is how I got there. I saw the Ancient One. That's the name of the prince over Ghana. What are the name of the princes over the UK? I haven't thought about that. This is an interesting vision because it's very biblical. He's been around for a long time. Since the Lord died on the cross and his blood flowed down and all creation bowed down to his victory, the enemy has been planning to regain his position. Very long strategy. There's a clear mark of his presence: depression and despair and darkness and bondage, shut in, as Jericho was, dark powers, darkness, all these horrible things. And this one was called the Ancient One. That's the prince over Ghana. And he has a very clear purpose. That's something that we have to understand. Many Christians seem to have no purpose in Ghana except to take more and more they can get. Most Christians have no awareness that this strategy is opposing us. And we have to be very aware and alert and strong to enforce on the enemy the victory we have. So there's the framework of the prince. I hope, I try to bring things down to clarity, to simple truths, because it's easy to understand. We're struggling against the spiritual powers. One of the spiritual powers, the Ancient One, is a prince in the heavenly realms over Ghana, and his presence is depressive and destructive, and he has a clear strategy. And if he gets hold of Ghana, then the UK will follow, because then he will have access to so much. That's where we are. Okay, so that's how I see it for myself, all flowing from this particular vision. I always find it very convenient to have this kind of simple framework in my mind. So then I can now add more information into that framework. That is the framework of these. Well, it's 3, then we're going to take a break, then it's 3 more. So the first 3 are the prince, and the second 3 pulling him down. We'll have a break in the middle. And this is the framework that I'm locked into. We are fighting the spiritual powers. That's quite biblical. The biblical powers are organized, just as every army is. And part of the spiritual power over Ghana is called the prince. This one's called the Ancient One. There are other princes that rule other nations. What was it that Michael said to Daniel? I was detained by the prince of Persia. And while we're looking at the prince over Ghana, the principles apply to all of us. So that's my simple framework. That's how I'm simply holding it together in my mind. That's how I work. I like to get a simple framework, and then within that framework I can add other things. So what can we add then? Well, let's look at the character of the prince now, because the character of the prince in Ghana will be the same as the character of the prince over Persia and the character of the prince over UK. We've got to look at his character. And we're going to do this in 2 sessions. I'm going to look at 2 sides of his character tonight and 3 more next week. And why do I do this? Because we don't want too much all at once. Well, I personally can't contain too much at once. I like to get my framework, then add a bit, then take a break, then add a bit more. So next week I shall know the framework and something of his character. That will have sunk into my mind. And then next week I can add a bit more of his character. So that's always been the way I work, and I hope you'll find it helpful. So what is the character of the prince? Here's the first of his characteristics: to destroy worship. Here's the first of his characters. Why? Why does he pick there? Because worship is what he wants. What he said to Jesus, all this I will give you if you will bow down and worship me, because worship is what we give to God. God has everything else. What can you give him? That's what I laugh at all this prosperity rubbish. Oh God, I'll give you £10,000. What's God say? I've got 50 trillion, billion of those if I want them, and I don't need it anyway to do my work. So, but worship, however, that's something we have to freely give to God. And that's what Satan wants to break, because he hates it. He hates it because it's what he wants. His plan is to get back on the throne and rule. That's what he wants. He wants to be God. And he wants to destroy our worship because he sees that as a way of destroying God. That's where he starts, I think, in our worship. Clever, isn't it? Because we don't look for him there, do we? We look from outside, but not inside. So what do we see in this character? Now, remember, all this is available in written form for you to look at afterwards. David's published the link, or he will tell you where to get it. So you can pick this up in written form, or you can watch it again. So first of all, he fills our worship with counterfeit signs. That's one way of polluting our worship, to fill it with counterfeit tongues, counterfeit miracles, counterfeit words of knowledge, counterfeit prophecies, counterfeit dreams. That's one way of polluting our worship, to fill our worship with counterfeit signs. What puzzles me is that those that lead worship don't seem to be aware of this, so they don't have any. Often I hear a word in a tongue and I don't get it interpreted, and the pastor doesn't seem to care. Someone comes up and proclaims a great miracle, but the pastor doesn't examine it first. Someone comes up with a great sign for this church. Well, did you share it with the pastor first? No, I don't need to do that. I'm in the spirit. No, you're not. You're outside the spirit, because everything has to be within church order. I see it all the time. In the Anglican church, we just doze off through liturgy. Anything can happen. And I see it in big conventions and in the big charismatic churches. There's no testing of signs, no testing of words. Half the church doesn't know how to test a prophecy. If someone says, "Thus says the Lord," it must be from God. Really? That might be the Old Testament, but the New Testament says, test the spirits. And I don't think an awful lot of testing goes on in the church. And the enemy loves that. He can fill our worship with counterfeit signs. And he can only do that because he's lazy, because we're lazy. I was at one convention, quite a big one, and some woman got up and spouted off something clearly not of God. So I said to the leader of the convention, "You're going to test this and sort this out?" "Why, it was wonderful." I said, "Look at the following 3 points that weren't biblical," because his mouth fell open. I said, "Well, so are you going to stop her?" "No." Well, I stopped her. I said, "Miss Sister, be quiet. You're not speaking of God." She wouldn't stop. So I got the stewards to take her out. Listen, this is what the enemy is up to. He's polluting worship. It's what he wants to do. He wants to He wants to fill our worship with counterfeit signs. Then he wants to exalt personal ministries and personal satisfactions. That's what he wants to do. He wants to. He wants the pastors to be puffed up. He wants the pastors to be puffed up, and we are full of it. Every level I see it, from Archbishop downwards. Pastors, those that lead lessons, those that lead worship, those on the church councils, those who lead small groups, those this, those that, those lead worship. I see it everywhere. Filled with self. I suppose that's really a better way of putting it, isn't it, really? To fill our worship with counterfeit signs and to exalt ministries, putting pride and satisfaction at the heart. I see it everywhere. And it's very destructive, because what's the Lord say? What did he say through Mary? He exalts the humble, but he brings down the proud. Pride is just about the worst sin there is, because it is saying, I am God. Look at my ministry. I'm just watching the time, half an hour, because units are expensive in Ghana. My ministry, I hear all the time, my ministry. You'll hear it all the time. My church. Really? Your church, your ministry. Some pastor came to see me and said, I want to talk about my ministry. I said, oh, that's interesting. I haven't got one of those. He was so shocked because I preach all over the world. I said, brother, I haven't got a ministry. I'm a servant. The Lord has a ministry. The Lord has a church. I serve him. But I see it very much lacking. And this is the work of the enemy amongst us, to fill our worship with counterfeit signs and to exalt personal ministries, putting pride and personal satisfaction at the heart. In Ghana, I see it amongst the pastors. In England, I see it particularly amongst the women. This preening, this look how important I am, look at me, look at that. It destroys the church, because the moment the Lord sees that, we're sunk. Absolutely sunk. And thirdly, to dazzle us with big events, big preachers, big feelings and big emotions. I see it all the time. Pastor John, 10,000 people come to my meetings, and I this and I that and on the other, and people just drift along to them, and because it's big and because there's lots, they believe them. I see it, I hear it all the time. We get dazzled by these charismatic people. We get dazzled and blinded by them. And all our faculties for judgment, evaluation, testing goes, because the big platform, the big choir, it's Ghana, isn't it? The big car parked out the front, all this dazzles. I once went to a group and the woman said, you must watch this video. My heart sank. It was the bishop's wife, 1 hour of shouting and arm waving and talking about herself. And at the end, the women said, wasn't that great? I said, what have you learned? They couldn't think of a thing they'd learned. I said, no, because all she did was exalted herself. You were blinded by the bishop's wife. She had a gold necklace. She had a really posh dress. She was sitting in a big chair surrounded by lots of other people. This is deceit and deception. Just because it's big doesn't make it of God. Enemy loves it. Absolutely loves it, because he can then puff, 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 puff up the people, and the worship goes down, 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 down. Now you may say, Prophet Jim, this is a bit hard. Well, it is hard because we're fighting a hard enemy. We can't afford to pussyfoot around this one. This is his character. The first point of his character. To fill our worship with counterfeit signs, gifts and wonders. To exalt personal ministries, putting pride and personal satisfaction at the heart. Dazzle us with big events, big preachers, big feelings and big emotions. The bigger the event, the more cautious I am. Because in that big event, people lose all their common sense. Big, 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 big. And Ghana particularly is dazzled by the big. Oh, if the pastor has a Mercedes, he must be of God. But if he's got a Toyota Corolla, he can't be, because God would have given him a bigger car. Please give me a break. This is the first mark of his character. Now, those listening, it's not easy, is it? It's not going to be an easy series. Because I'm not preaching for children or beginners. We're standing in the front line here facing Goliath. So we need to be very, very direct. And the character of our enemy will be in our worship all the time, filling it with counterfeit signs, gifts and wonders, exalting personal ministries, putting pride and personal satisfaction at the heart, and the big events. That is the first point of his character. And where does that lead us? What's it all about? Why pick on this as a mark of his character? Why not pick on his strength, his power, his deceiving, his shutting in? Why pick on this? Because this is the one thing that he will never be able to do. He cannot worship, and he hates it, but he believes he can destroy it, then he can destroy God. That's why he focuses here. And so many teachings on spiritual warfare, which I've done 10 million, and there's loads more to learn, but this is the heart of the attack. Destroy the worship. And you know why? Oh, look, the finger's up now. It must be important. Sorry about that. But he attacked the worship because then he can believe he can destroy God, and he can get the worship then. It becomes his. And once he's got that, he can say to God, get out. Your people have abandoned you. So that's why this is so important. And this is where it will lead us. Okay, that is where it will lead us in the end. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. That's where destroying the worship will lead us. Formalism, pride, bigness, all those things will destroy our relationship with him. Now, the enemy knows that. That's why he aims so carefully at our worship. Were you expecting that tonight? Is that what you expected me to say? I wonder if you were. I've been a Christian for 75 years. I've been a pastor for 54. I've been a prophet for nearly 40. Been working in Ghana for nearly 30. I've spoken in nearly 70 countries of the world. I've seen his works. I know them. I recognise them. And I know where the attack will come. Come in many places, but this is the one most of all, because this will destroy our relationship with the Lord. And once that's gone, then he's got it. Yes, that needs some thinking about, doesn't it? And I did say we would just do 2 characters tonight. We've got 7 minutes left, so as you know, we watch. This is the second part of his character, to destroy worship, and the second is to reign and rule. That's what he wants. He wants to reign and rule. That is his intention. Now, oh, sorry about the finger. It's come up again. This is how it works. Perhaps you haven't thought this through before. It goes like this, particularly if you take Ghana. Right? If he can get on the throne of Ghana, if he can rule Ghana, if he can isolate the church in its foolish prosperity situation and blind it with miracles and counterfeit signs and all that and exalt men, if he can do all that, eventually this will happen. Right? That's his strategy. That will happen. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. That's what will happen. Right? And the second area of his character is this one, that he wants to reign and rule. So really, what I'm saying there is absorbed into this. He wants to reign and rule. He wants to be God. And in order to be God, if he can break one nation away from God's rule, he can say to God, you no longer rule. I rule Ghana, and I'm going after all the rest. Reign and rule. Here it is. This is Revelation 13. I haven't got time to teach it all. I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. There's some intensely important things here. The whole chapter needs expounding. Perhaps I'll do that sometime. But look, the first beast, or the dragon, whichever, let's call this beast the Prince of Ghana. It wants the earth and its inhabitants to worship him. See, so that's one of the things we talked tonight. Whose fatal wound had been healed. That's the second one. because only one person has had a fatal wound healed, and that's Jesus. See, he wants to deceive with falseness, and he wants authority so he can rule. So in many ways, this scripture really tucks really well into the first one. The first one said he wants to destroy worship and he wants to break our relationship with God. And here, the reign and rule characteristic, here it is. Exactly. The prince wants them to worship him, and he wants to deceive them by showing his fatal wound that's been healed. He wants to rule and reign. He wants to rule and reign. He wants to rule us, and he wants to reign over us. He wants to rule us, so putting us back in chains, which we got free from through the death of Jesus. And he wants to deceive us by telling us his fatal wound has been healed. He's risen from the dead. And so, is this Jesus? Nothing. See? Those two parts of his character interlock, to break worship and to reign and rule. That's his character. To break worship, 1, and to reign and rule, that's 2. Now, this makes him an extremely dangerous enemy, because he is going for everything. He wants to break worship. He wants to reign and rule. We'll see other things next week which will add to these. I'll give you a better picture of him, but just a little at a time. Get these two in our heads. And then he can reign and rule from the throne of Ghana. That's it. He's broken worship, so we honour Jesus with our lips, but our hearts are far from us. He's deceived us by showing us that he has been raised from the dead. He's got a fatal wound, so nothing to worry about there. He will insist we worship him and put us back in the chains that Jesus broke from us. And then he will say to God, you do not rule Ghana, so you do not rule the world. And I'm going to take Mali, and I'm going to take Burkina, and I'm going to take Togo, I'm going to take Cote d'Ivoire, I'm going to take Europe, I'm going to take UK, I'm going to take America. I'm already ruling clearly in some of these eastern countries already. And I will then be in a position to step up and take the throne, which I want, deserve, and you denied me. That is spiritual warfare. See, what I hear a lot of is the spiritual armour of Ephesians 6, and that's great, but it's for children. This is for mature, hard soldiers. The enemy is strong, dangerous, highly motivated, and has a clear vision. I say all this against the background, as I said at the beginning, that he's already defeated. We know that, but he doesn't know it. And he has a good strategy, and this is it. And every soldier engaged in spiritual warfare should stop looking at the spiritual armour and start looking at the reality of the battle we're fighting. And I say this from a very great deal of experience, a very great deal of study. As a trained theologian and a priest in the church, this is what I see Ghana is facing, and this is what the UK is facing. And until we face up to what we're facing, we're never going to destroy. And Satan may get on Ghana's throne, and we may go into the dark ages for 1,000 years. The Lord will come again, and all be well. I know that. But it's what happens in between. And this is where I get worried. So many Ghanaians and British don't seem to care, but I got grandchildren. And I got children yet unborn in my line, and what am I going to hand them? That's what motivates me. Okay, everybody, here is the key. Okay, it's warfare to the last breath, everybody. I've got no choice there. So, next week, the prince will obstruct the work of the Lord. That's the third of his characters, and there'll be 2 others as well. We will, as it were, grow out the prince a bit more next week. We'll look a bit more at his background and his character. And then lastly, we'll look at what his activity is. In the next series, we'll look at how he can be defeated. You can't do it all at once, can we? Thank you, David, for setting this all up, for monitoring it for me in Seaford and watching over it every minute so I can just get on and do the work. We appreciate it, and also sending out all the links and helping us to find the text. We do appreciate it. Okay, everybody, see you next week.